Uh, yeah, I'll do it this way. The link is a comment in the other one. So this should be Philosophy of Mind 4. Say copy link, and we'll go comment. On that. We'll find a way to do this faster in future. Okay, let's continue. We're trying to get through David Hume. Once again, it's at the beginning. My least favorite of this little section. But to remind us of what we're doing philosophy of mind, but we're doing the intro to the intro right now. So, in our backbone course, which is what this is a part of, we're looking at 8 major questions in philosophy, and we're just cherry picking different essays from different people that are all put together in this book, the third edition of A Modern Introduction to Philosophy, which was chosen at the suggestion of another professor who told me, look, it'll lean in a direction opposite of the one you lean in. So that'll help. So we did determinism and free will. We did the mind body problem, but it wasn't recorded. And now Elena came in to do it because we're going to be doing the philosophy of mind course. So we're recording it this time. But we've done the existence of God, which was a great question or section. And what else did we do? We did the mind body. Oh, and now we're in the middle of ethics. So we do that Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. But Elena and I are doing on Monday and Wednesday the recorded version of this intro to philosophy of mind. And in it, we're going to focus only on the mind body problem. So we're going to look at the mind body problem and little some bits of questions of identity, which David Hume is going to look at here. And I think we're going to find that we're going to see what happens. He kind of goes through a journey for a guy that doesn't believe in a character or a self. He actually goes a little bit through a journey in this essay itself, if I remember correctly. We'll be wrapping that up today, hopefully, and then on Wednesday we'll start with the next author. And we did the intro course, so we understand what the question of the mind-body problem is. So let's continue from here. But as hmm, but as notwithstanding this distinction and separability, we suppose the whole train of perceptions to be united by identity. A question naturally arises concerning this relation of identity, whether it be something that really binds our several perceptions together or only associates their ideas in the imagination. That is, in other words, whether in pronouncing concerning the identity of a person, we observe some real bond among his perceptions or only feel one among the ideas we form of them. This question we might easily decide if we would recollect what has been already proved at large that the understanding never observes any real connection among objects, and that even the union of cause and effect, when strictly examined, resolves itself into a customary association of ideas. For from thence it evidently follows that identity is nothing really belonging to these different perceptions and uniting them together, but is merely a quality which we attribute to them because of the union of their ideas in the imagination when we reflect upon them. Now, the only qualities which can give ideas a union in the imagination are these 3 relations above mentioned. These are the uniting principles in the ideal world. And without them, every distinct object is separable by the mind and may be separately considered and appears not to have any more connection with any other object than if disjoined by the greatest difference and remoteness. Let's pause before we finish this paragraph. Uh, we're going to get into some really good discussion on Hume in a minute because the second year and third year material is a lot different than this cherry picking backbone first year stuff. And Elena has already gone through a lot of that. And so we're going to have a really cool discussion about this in a moment from some of those perspectives. But I want to do a little bit of that right now and pause and say, hold on a second, wait, pause. When Socrates was arguing for the immortality of the soul, he made this exact same argument. He said the mind can infinitely draw distinctions between things, they're not the same. That's why he said we live in a shadow world. David Hume is speaking as if he is a shadow in Hades, right? His philosophy is maybe very impressive intellectually if you were a shadow in Hades. Socrates felt like we were all sort of shadows compared to the ultimate real that he was looking for, that he believed he could get to. after his death, but that he could orient himself towards the arche, the source of all truth being goodness, justice, and love. That that thing is really real, and he was aiming towards it. But he made this argument to prove that the soul has the nature of something that can relate to something like that. And he said, let's see. This is because this is an argument that I know we've looked at a bit because we've done a bit of Socrates of the Platonic essays, especially the first third. But if you'll remember in his argument, he says something along the lines of the following. Um, what was his example? Let's say I had a chalkboard here and I know his example. His example is you walk into a statue store with a bunch of statues of Zeus and a bunch of statues of Venus. Okay. Um, well, he was Greek, so he would have said Aphrodite, right? Isn't she the Greek equivalent? Isn't Venus Roman, Latin? I don't remember. Anyway,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
You would know.
It's Aphrodite in Greek.
Yeah, right. Okay, good. Let's say Hera anyway. Zeus and Hera, close connection. But in any case, um, so you've got statues of different gods. You got Aphrodite over here, you've got Zeus over there. We won't insult our Greek friends by mixing and matching the Latin and Greek. But he says, but they're all made of different things. Like this one's stone and that one's wood. This one's slightly larger, that one's slightly smaller. And yet you can look at a stone and a wood statue of Zeus in exactly the same position, say, oh, these are the same. There's nothing the same about them, he says. You could look at a statue of Aphrodite in wood and a statue of Zeus in stone, and you could look at a rock that you found on the ground or a little piece of driftwood, and you could say these two are the same. That's just garbage. These are statues. How can you identify the sameness of anything? So Socrates says, wait a minute, hold on. There's nothing in the material that's the same. Where did you get the idea that they're the same? How did you discover their sameness? He says, I'll tell you how. You might think it's crazy when you first hear it, but I, Socrates, will show you that every other attempt to solve this problem results in no solution at all. The only solution that could possibly work is that you have within yourself a connection to ultimate sameness as a principle. Like sameness qua sameness. And you bring that to your understanding of other things. You see it and say, oh, well, I know what real sameness is. I know what infinite sameness is. I know what infinite oneness is or what infinite anything is. I know what that is. I have access somehow to that. And then I can say these two things more participate with that than these other two things, right? The statue of Aphrodite versus the statue of Zeus, they're less like that than two statues of Zeus. And the statue of wood of Zeus and the statue of stone of Zeus are less like that thing than two statues of in stone of Zeus, right? So I know the ultimate absolute sameness, and I can see how much these two particular things participate in the nature of that ultimate thing. He says, any other attempt at trying to solve that problem will fail. And you might say, no, it doesn't. I just see that, this is more the same than that. And I abstract to the idea of an absolute sameness if you want to talk about it, but I get to that after the fact. He goes, no, you can't. How can we show that? Well, if I have a chalkboard here and I draw a number 4 and then I draw a number set, another number 4, there's nothing the same about those two symbols. The amount of chalk, the molecules of the chalk, take a microscope and zoom in, the curves of the lines, they're not the same. They, actually, we could do that right here. Let's do that right here. I know that there's one here. That one works. Okay. Seen this one work before. So we're just going to say share. This should be a feature. Hey, anybody in StreamYard, this should be a feature of StreamYard. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and say, here's a 4. Here's a 4. Here's another 4. Let's just look at these two, this one and this one. All right. There's nothing the same about them. You see that they're the same, but you didn't understand that they were the same from anything that you examined with your eyes. I can try to draw them the same. No matter how much I try to draw them the same, they're not the same damn thing. They're not in the same position, but they're also just switching where you're looking. There's how do you know how can you learn anything? How can you know anything? Socrates says, well, you already know the infinite reality, and then you see that these two participate in it more than these two do, and more than these two do in totally different ways, right? These two, here's another four. Oh, what's that way that people draw fours? Those look like nines. Let's get rid of that nonsense there. Isn't there a way of drawing a four like that? No, that looks like a damn nine. I can't remember how people do it. Something like that. Okay. So you know, you can see that but even if you take the two that are the most the same, how did you ever learn what a four was to recognize it in another place? Socrates says the only way that can be the case is that there's an ultimate reality of fourness and an ultimate reality of sameness, and there's a part of you that is divine, there's a part of you that's connected to the infinite, and that's why you can navigate this world and make distinctions like that. David Hume is saying, well, I agree with Socrates. There's no way that you could know sameness about anything. It's an illusion. It's a fantasy. There's nothing that's the same. There are no fours, and there are no two different fours that are the same, or two different numbers that are written the same way, or anything like that. It's just illusory, or you're making it up in your mind. It's an error. It's not really ultimately real. So, in any case, um, they're both noticing the same thing, and they're having a different, conclusion that they're drawing from it, but all right, let's finish. These are the uniting principles in the ideal world. That's the Socratic world, right? And without them, every distinct object is separable by the mind and may be separately considered, and appears not to have any more connection with any other object than if disjoined by the greatest difference and remoteness. It is therefore on some of these three relations of resemblance, continuity, and causation that identity depends. The idea of identity. He's trying to say, where does it come from? If it's not real, because he's only going to say things are real if they come to me through the senses. If it's not real, this notion of identity, where does it come from? It comes from one of these three relations of resemblance, continuity. He says contiguity and causation, that identity depends. And as the very essence of these relations consists in their producing an easy transition of ideas, it follows that our notions of personal identity proceed entirely from the smooth and uninterrupted progress of the thought along a train of connected ideas according to the principles above explained. The only question, therefore, which remains is by what relations this uninterrupted progress of our thought is produced when we consider existence of a mind or thinking person. And here it is evident we must confine ourselves to resemblance and causation and drop the contiguity, which has little or no influence in the present case. To begin with resemblance, suppose we could see clearly into the breast of another and observe that succession of perceptions which constitute his mind or thinking principle, and suppose that he always preserves the memory of a considerable part of the past perceptions. It is evident that nothing could more contribute to the bestowing a relation on this succession amidst all its variations. It's his memory of other events. For what is the memory but a faculty by which we raise up the images of past perceptions? And as an image necessarily resembles its object, must not the frequent placing of these resembling perceptions in the chain of thought convey the imagination more easily from one link to another and make the whole seem like the continuance of one object? In this particular, then, the memory not only discovers the identity, but also contributes to its production. The case is the same whether we consider ourselves or others. Okay, so that's his first answer. You have an experience, and you have this illusion that there's a you having the experience. You've never experienced the you, so you have no right to talk about it. But the perception of something is happening. And when you're perceiving it, you're having other perceptions. And some of those perceptions are, or some of those cognitive manifestations, the things that are going on in your mind are just memories of other times that you've perceived other things. So the memory is reminding you of other perceptions that have occurred. And you're thinking, aha, it's me both times. And he's saying there is no me having the perceptions. All you have access to through your senses are the perceptions. You had one perception, you had another perception, but there was no you having the perception. You have no access. You haven't experienced the you. You've only experienced the perception. So that's all that he's willing to affirm exists. And he says, well, why do we have the illusion that it's true of us or how we might imagine things are for other people? It's clearly in part because of memory. Memory is bringing up an object I experienced in the past while I'm experiencing a different object. And so I imagine a continuity, I imagine a similarity between the two. That's what I call me. As to causation, we may observe that the true idea of a human mind is to consider it as a system of different perceptions or different existences, right? Each perception is a new existence. It's like you pop into being in the moment you have a perception, and that's to the degree that you're having the perception. That's all there is of you as far as he can tell. Because he did the rationalist experiment in his own mind and said that's all I find there, which are linked together by the relation of cause and effect and mutually produce, destroy, influence, and modify each other. Our perceptions give rise to their correspondent ideas, and these ideas, in their turn, produce other impressions. One thought chases another and draws after it a third, by which it is expelled in its turn. In this respect, I cannot compare the soul more properly to anything than to a republic or commonwealth. Oh my God, it's almost like we have a photographic negative of Socrates in a sense. I cannot compare the soul more properly to anything than a republic or commonwealth in which the several members are united by the reciprocal ties of government and subordination and give rise to other persons who propagate the same republic in the incessant changes of its parts. And as the same individualistic republic may not only change its members, but also its laws and constitution, in like manner, the same person may vary his character and disposition, as well as his impressions and ideas, without losing his identity. Whatever changes he endures, his several parts are still connected by the relation of causation. And in this view, our identity with regard to the passions serves to corroborate that with regard to the imagination by the making our distant perceptions influence each other, and by giving us a present concern for our past or future pains or pleasures. As memory alone acquaints us with the continuance and existence of the succession of perceptions, it is to be considered upon that account chiefly as the source of personal identity. What is the source of personal identity chiefly? Memory and the tricky things it does to the ideas that it suggests to us about who we are. None of which we have direct access to, none of which comes through our senses. Where does this idea come from? This identity notion? It comes as a byproduct of the fact that we have memory. Had we no memory, we never should have any notion of causation, nor consequently of that chain of causes and effects which constitute our self or person. But having once acquired this notion of causation from the memory, we can extend the same chain of causes and consequently the identity of our persons beyond our memory, and can comprehend times and circumstances and actions which we have entirely forgot, but perhaps in general have in ge- but suppose in general to have existed. For how few of our past actions are there of which we have any memory? Who can tell me, for instance, what were his thoughts and actions on the 1st of January, 1715, and the 11th of March in 1719, right? We could just say the 1st of January in 2015, the 11th of March in 2019, and the 3rd of August in 2033, or let's see, 2023. Or will he affirm, because he has entirely forgotten the incidents of these days, that the present self is not the same person with the self of that time, and by that means overturn all the most established notions of personal identity? In this view, therefore, memory does not so much produce as discover personal identity by showing us the relation of cause and effect among our different perceptions. It will be incumbent on those who affirm that memory produces entirely our personal identity to give a reason why we can thus extend our identity beyond our memory. Hmm. Give me a second. I can see why that's the reason he wouldn't use the word produce, but he wants to use the word discover. Let's see. Maybe he's going to try to find a foothold and climb his way out of this.
Can you please repeat the last sentence?
Yeah, let's do that. In this view, therefore, memory does not so much produce as discover personal identity by showing us the relation of cause and effect among our different perceptions. It will be incumbent on those who affirm that memory produces entirely our personal identity to give a reason why we can thus extend our identity beyond our memory. Remember, he doesn't think we have access to cause and effect as something that we can know either. So I still think he's just talking about things he thinks are illusory, but let's see where he goes with this. The whole of this doctrine leads us to a conclusion, which is of great importance in the present affair, viz., that all the nice and subtle questions concerning personal identity can never possibly be decided and are to be regarded rather as grammatical than as philosophical difficulties. Identity depends on the relations of ideas, and these relations produce identity by means of that easy transition they occasion. But as the relations and the easiness of the transition may diminish by insensible degrees, we have no just standard by which we can decide any dispute concerning the time when they acquire or lose a title to the name of identity. All the disputes concerning the identity of connected objects are merely verbal, except so far as the relation of parts gives rise to some fiction or imaginary principle of union, as we have already observed. So, where Socrates said, there's no way you can see the sameness of these things, they're not the same, unless you have this ultimate access to sameness, qua sameness. What David Hume is saying is, you can't possibly know the sameness of any two things because they're not the same. And here's how you psychologically and with language create the illusion of the sameness. And the way he says that happens is partly from memory, partly from the simplicity of abstraction, sometimes based in cause, purpose, location, something that's similar about the two. I mean, I think Socrates would say, "What do you mean similar about the two? How did you even notice that? How did you right? Like, how can you notice? Right? Remember when he's saying the identity of other objects? It's coming from one of these three things, which is this same mental abstraction thing, and then it happens so quickly that we don't notice the illusion. But Socrates might say, well, what do you mean the same? The common end? What do you mean a common end? How can you notice that the end is like, okay, the church burns down and you build a new one. You build it out of stone instead of brick and you use a different design. Hey, you've rebuilt your church. You recognize it's the same church because it has the same purpose. How do you know it has the same purpose? It has the same parishioners. What do you mean the same parishioners? If you're right, David Hume, you shouldn't be able to notice the sameness even of the thing that you are saying is then linking them together illegitimately so that we think of them as an identity. So we'll have to look into that more further perhaps, but let's keep going. All right, the whole of this doctrine leads us to a conclusion as the relations, the easiness of the transition may diminish, but all of the disputes concerning what I have said concerning the first origin and uncertainty of our notion of identity as applied to the human mind. Now, notice he's also really still doing, again, in the second year, we'll look at the context that he comes in as one of the two branches wrestling with what Descartes did. But he's like the far end extreme of where empiricism takes you, like Mellenbranche is the far extreme of where rationalism takes you, and both get into this crazy type of a crisis where nothing seems to be real. Descartes unifying the two, perhaps. He's in the consummate thinkers course for a reason. But Hume is taking the consequences of this empiricism far. And what he's saying is, why did I bring up the context? Oh, because of Descartes, right? So oh, geez, I'm so sorry. I lost my train of thought. Why did I feel the need to bring up Descartes? He's in the shadow of Descartes here, and that was significant to understand. Oh, right. Okay. So what I have said concerning the first origin and uncertainty of our notion of identity as applied to the human mind may be extended with little or no variation to that of simplicity. Okay. Notice that what Descartes said to do is I've got three categories on the table. I've got things I know are false, I've got things I can doubt, and then I've got things over here that I know for sure are true. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, wipe everything off the table in the first two categories. If it's doubtable in any way, I'm throwing it out until I know for sure I can add it because it's been built on things that I know for sure have to be true. David Hume's doing the same thing. He isn't proving that there's no identity exactly. He's giving a story of how we might have the illusion of it, right? So he clearly thinks there's no such thing. But what he's saying is there's uncertainty here, right? As long as I can show that you don't really know it for real, it may as well not be true, right? He only wants to affirm things that he feels justified in affirming. And if there's any uncertainty, it's going off the table for him. It's just he can wipe off more from the table than Descartes could, it seems, or he thinks he can. Alana has a really good point to make about that, which we're going to look at the end of this. An object whose different coexistent parts are bound together by a close relation operates upon the imagination after much the same manner as one perfectly simple and indivisible, and requires not a much greater stretch of thought in order in order to its conception. From this similarity of operation, we attribute a simplicity to it and feign a principle of union as the support of this simplicity and the center of all the different parts and qualities of the object. Upon a more strict review of the section concerning personal identity, I find myself involved in such a labyrinth that I must confess I neither know how to correct my former opinions nor how to render them consistent. If this be not a good general reason for skepticism, it is at least a sufficient one. If I were not already abundantly supplied, for me to entertain a diffidence and modesty in all my decisions. I shall propose the arguments on both sides, beginning with those that induced me to deny the strict and proper identity and simplicity of a self or thinking being. All right, we're going to stop there. David Hume is a character. And in this essay alone, he's going through a journey. That gives us a new way to read this. He's looked back at everything that we've read so far, and he says, this is a mess. And I have to confess, I don't know how to correct the opinions I've expressed so far, nor do I know how to render them consistent. He sees inconsistencies and self-contradictions in the things that he's been saying. We were just gently trying to point one that potentially might exist. We're going to do that quite humbly there. He's in a very impressive intellect, and what he's doing is a hell of a journey right now. It's almost as if he's journaling the path of death and rebirth that Nietzsche said you have to go through, the loneliest path, the one where your footsteps erase your footsteps as you're going on the journey. He's going on it and recording it, and he's not in the position that he was in before. He's looked back at all the arguments we've read so far, and he goes, this is a mess. I have no idea how to make sense out of it. I don't know how to fix what's wrong with it, and I don't know how to make it consistent even with itself. David
But
Hume is an what?
keep on exploring it.
Okay. He says, let's just take a deep breath and say, if that's not a good enough reason to be a skeptic and just say, look, I don't know nothing. I don't claim to know anything because I just made what I thought were really good arguments for that there can't be personal identity. And I'm going to even show you how we create the illusion of it. And he looks back and he goes, even this is falling apart. I'm saying everything is falling apart. Even my arguments here are falling apart. Let's just be really skeptical. That's that same attitude of if I don't know for sure, it's going in the bin until I know for sure. Okay, he's going to try to make both sides of the argument as strongly as he can now. When we talk of self or substance, either one, we must have an idea annexed to these terms. Otherwise, they are altogether unintelligible. Every idea is derived from preceding impressions. That's his empiricist commitment, right? And we have no impression of self or of substance as something simple and individual. We have, therefore, no idea of them in that sense. So his first thing he's going to say is this: look, you only know things if ultimately you can trace back how you know them to something that came to you through your senses. By definition, or just by doing the experiment himself rationally, he says, I have no impression. I have no sensory experience of myself or of other substances. What was Socrates after? I'm going to keep linking him to Socrates because he wants to do what Socrates wanted to do, and nobody wants to do it with either of them, even in the time that they were alive or anywhere else, right? Socrates says, I want to know the thing in itself. Where's the thing in itself? David Hume says, I have no ability to sense the thing in itself. All I can sense is what the thing is doing upon my senses. He denies that there is a thing in itself. Socrates says, I affirm there's a thing. I want to know it. I can't know it. David Hume says, I can't know it. Why would I say it's real? A word
May I,
has to mean something. What the words self and substance mean is something we can't have an impression of, and every idea has to derive from our impressions. Therefore, we have no idea what these terms mean. Go ahead, Elena.
I cannot grasp how he can refute, deny um, the self or the consciousness driving the vehicle, the human body, the being within, because I am certain that he, as well as a human being, had felt the preferences or the pushes towards and the pushes away from desires, whether it be from mundane stuff like food, what flavor you prefer, or what kind of food you prefer, from the kindergarten of choices and preferences to the more to the soul level preferences where you feel that you feel that you are keen to that, and you align and you resonate in a way that it might be inexplicable, but it might be the characterological that you say of Socrates, which is the Platonic idea of methexis to its freaking core. I cannot understand how he can refute that self or consciousness, since he must have certainly experienced these pulls and pushes of preferences.
Okay,
I mean,
good.
I don't know.
That's good. I think that's a big hammer blow. So let's examine that attack against David Hume's perspective and let's flush it out a little bit here. I'm going to repeat back to you what I think you just said, and you tell me if I've got it right. I think it's a pretty powerful argument. And then we'll try to put on the David Hume hat after that and see what would he respond to? Like how would he respond to that? Okay. Okay, David. You are like a Cartesian animal. You're like a robot. You have a series of perceptions, and there's no you beyond the series of perceptions. You have memory of other perceptions. You perform like intellectual moves, and so you create these illusions of a self that persists and all of that. you believe it, but now you are so philosophical, you're going to stare at the fact that you've never had a perception of yourself. So, how do you know that there could even be such a thing? And you can be a good skeptic and not be affirming things that you don't have any reason to say are true. Okay. Elena comes along and says, David, have you always thought that way? Not about the conclusion, but the path that got you there. Was there a time when you didn't think with those intentions? When you didn't think with those intentions, was there a time when you said, "I wish I thought more honestly. I wish I," you know, let's go back to your food example. I want to eat this bad food that's not good for me. I know I want to, but I also want to not want to anymore. I know it's bad for me. I want to be the sort of person who can resist eating this bad food. Okay. How is that derivable from a memory of something else on just perceptions? If all you are is made up of perceptions, how can you have this meta analysis of yourself to say, there's a direction I wish I was going and a place I wish to be? I don't know it perfectly, but it's not where I am right now. What the hell does that have to do with perceptions or the memories of perceptions? I think you're discussing these second or third tier volitions and self-analysis. So first of all, did I miss the point of your criticism? Is there another argument that might be even better that you were trying to make and I've misunderstood it? Elena, you're on mute.
All right. So the only, sorry about that. The only
Oh,
thing
it's okay.
that complements the previous argument is that maybe I have in mind, in a way, while I'm trying to understand him, maybe he just puts blindfolds while he is standing between, in the gap between the hot and cold, between the having impressions, or I don't know how else to explain it.
Well, he doesn't think you need a blindfold because he doesn't see that there's any you there. I mean, he says it might not be true of Elena, but it's true of me. When I try to think about where myself exists, all of the evidence of myself is I felt something.
Okay, so how does he explain the I like to eat tzatziki? Okay, I do not like to eat tzatziki when it has carrots, for example. Simple stuff,
How
everyday stuff.
dare you? Tzatziki
Oh,
is always good. Okay.
ex- no, with carrots, no. But okay, keep it traditional, absolutely traditional. So how does he refute that there is a something that has the drive, the preference of tzatziki, as is the traditional recipe, and doesn't like the one with the carrot?
So he
What is that?
identified us as having memory faculties and dispositions. He didn't seem to think that that was a challenge, although it might very well be a challenge to his perspective. But let's examine that. So he identified that we have dispositions. You you know that you like tzatziki and you like it traditionally, and you're repulsed by the idea of eating it with carrots. Well, that's because you have memory of perceptions of eating it with in a traditional way, of seeing other people eat it with carrots, of like you have all your memories of all your perceptions, and you just abstract from them and you say, I'm the sort of person who, in a future experience with tzatziki, would be repulsed by the idea of dipping a carrot into it.
Okay, so sorry to butt in for a moment. So is it a matter of the quality of the impressions after taste? If I had a good time, if I had not, similar to if identity cannot be attained even through resemblance, contiguity, or causation, is like trying. You cannot even find your identity through um, of course, according to Hume, you cannot find your identity according to what feels foreign to you. He doesn't even acknowledge an I behind all that to even intuitively choose, what resonates with your soul. Because
So
in the
you
end,
you say, I know I won't like tzatziki with carrots next year. And you've got good reason to say that, and it's likely the case. David Hume says you have no reason to know that that's true because there is no you that is consistent. There's just different experiences that happen in succession. What it's important so we can highlight how skeptical he's being. David Hume says, I've experienced the sun rising every morning. Don't ask me what's going to happen tomorrow morning. I have no idea. At 7 a.m. tomorrow, I have no idea what's going to happen. I have no reason to believe that the future will be like the past because the idea of continuity is not something that came to me through my senses. It's just something I believe. So we might get to a point where his radical skepticism seems idiotic to us just by its conclusions, where you could just say, well, if these are the conclusions you're coming to, there must be something wrong with your reasoning process. We could say, you've presented your own reductio ad absurdum, which is a term we learned in one of the other essays because they brought it up, right? It's been reduced to an absurdity. That it's just, well, if you can't know that, then okay, there's something wrong with the way you're trying to go about knowing things. But David Hume is saying, I'm being consistent. I'm using reason and I'm looking at what I actually really know, and I don't know that. I don't know that there's a me that will feel the same way about tzatziki and carrots next year as last year or my entire life. It could be just as likely and just as solid a prediction as that the sun will come up tomorrow, but guess what? I don't know that either. So it's helping us to illustrate exactly where David Hume is. He's stuck in this cave. He doesn't even believe he's in it. He just thinks the shadows are real and that's all he knows for sure. That's all he can see are the shadows, and he's only going to affirm what he can see. The shadows are real, and if I'm shadow-like, my experience of the shadows, that's real, but there's no non-shadows. All it is shadows on the wall. That's all I can affirm because that's all I can see.
Although you said that he is like the shadow of Kant, he truly feels like being having a will or the shadowy equivalent of Socrates' daemon.
I think
No,
I think that's what I meant to say he's the photographic negative of Socrates.
and I think either way, I know. I mean, there are points in his reasoning that I truly cannot understand. I will try to, but I
You're in
cannot
good
get it.
company because he can't either. In this one paragraph, he says, I looked back on everything I said and I can't make sense of it, and I can't even make it logically consistent.
As to make sure that I truly got it, he did say that you cannot even get identity through, or identity is not whatever is acquired through resemblance, contiguity, and causation. Is
Yeah,
that
that's where
right?
the illusion comes from, he thinks. Socrates might say, where did you get this idea of sameness? And so that you could have contiguity or sameness and causation.
Okay, that was another thing that I truly cannot understand. I mean, okay, I get that it's difficult along his philosophical journey, his noetic trail, that you cannot accept because it might collapse a bit of your structure, or you just cannot accept or understand or see the fourness of the world, the sixness of the world, the sixness as an element of the world's structure, a bit Pythagorean aspect, this perspective. I can understand that he might not truly understand it or even deny it for the sake to keep his structure sturdy. But even denying for not the not being stuck to the sameness, but to the symbol of its whatever for is just a symbol, just differently drawn of an idea of a for. even if he doesn't accept fourness as a structure of the cosmos or the universe. I
Yeah,
truly try to
yeah,
understand.
that's so I think that would be I think that would be Socrates's response to this is you're proving that you have a relation to fourness and a relation to sameness when you try to deny that they're actually the same. It's like what you're saying you can't prove is true is something that you're noticing. How can you deny it if it isn't justifiable in the way that you think things have to be justifiable? Why don't you say it's more real than my justification method could be used to do it, or I know it more truly than I know things in a propositional way, or um because see the idea is the act of denying it has to put forward the idea. Like if he was really consistent here, he shouldn't be able to point out the problem, right? We should just be robots. We should just be Cartesian robots. And he thinks he's coming up with a story of where the illusion comes from, but that illusion relies upon our participation with a notion of sameness, which we aren't getting from any of our experiences in the world. Socrates says we don't get it from our experiences in the world, and David Hume says we don't get it from our experiences in the world. David Hume is saying, therefore, we don't have it. We don't have what, David Hume? What don't we have? Well, you know what I mean. Yeah, exactly. I do know what you mean. But we shouldn't be able to know what it is that you're denying if what you're saying is actually true, right? Like that is the Socratic argument. So let's pause for a second. There's this idea that people have that like later philosophers benefit from the knowledge of and the arguments of previous philosophers. So there's a progress happening here. There is a progress in philosophy, but it ain't like that. Uh, a a less inaccurate way of conceptualizing, and we're going to see this as we do the second year material, but right now we're just cherry picking different authors that are talking about the topics in our 101 courses. But we're going to really see it in year two. To me, a better lens for understanding philosophy is to say there's a big tent with 127 geniuses in it from various times, and they're all addressing each other. Socrates is making all the same observations that David Hume is making here, and actually going further with them. I think he's drawing conclusions. We're not saying he's right or wrong, but we're saying his system doesn't suffer from the inconsistency that David Hume recognizes his system suffers from. Like i- David Hume is blind to what Socrates was trying to point out, but what Socrates was pointing out, he was pointing out in exactly the same way David Hume is right now. So anybody who thinks they've understood Socrates's argument but don't get what David Hume is pointing out here didn't understand Socrates's argument. Socrates' argument is you have no right to think that you understand the sameness of anything. Everything is different. Everything is variable. You brought that to you brought knowledge you already had. That's what Socrates will affirm. David Hume is saying there's no such thing. But he's saying you brought that to your examination of the things. And that's what allowed you to see their sameness. David Hume is saying, before we get started, there's no such thing as knowing things except if they come through the senses. Now, since I think that's true, let's see where that leads. And where it leads is, oh my God, we don't know anything. Well, that's what Socrates was saying. He was saying, give up on these subjects. You'll never know the way you want to know through any of these ways of knowing. The ultimate truth is not accessible that way. But there is a weakness, I think, I don't want to we're here to understand David Hume while we look at this essay, but I think Elena has pointed out a real problem. Again, he's genius. We're not trying to pick on him or dismiss him too easily, but David Hume himself seems to see this problem. And it's the point Socrates was making, which is how are you even able to identify what it is that we are illusorily accepting? This error of ours shouldn't be noticeable to you David Hume, you shouldn't be able to say, "Oh, we see the sameness in the purpose of the thing. We see the similarities, and so we just have this fantasy and we posit a similarity of the thing and an identity to it, but we don't have any access to that." Socrates says, "Yeah, you don't have access to the thing in itself. Give me a definition. We'll end in perplexity. I'm telling you, you don't know it that way." But the f the fact that you can even bring up, David Hume, that there is a similarity at all, that's inescapable. That's your whole argument is based on being able to recognize that. And if you're correct, that shouldn't be recognizable to us, but it is recognizable to us. So you must be wrong. There's a way of swallowing the true observations of David Hume to defeat the seeming consequences of it. Does that make sense? But turning away from it because you don't want to look at it doesn't get you there. Then you're just in the ignorance of thinking you know things that you don't really know, right? David Hume is saying you don't know it that way. That's what Socrates was saying too. But Socrates was saying, but you do know it. And the reason why we know you know it is that you shouldn't be able to even have the illusion, right? David Hume is saying, well, therefore it must be an illusion. So I'll give you a story psychologically of how that illusion comes about. But that illusion is reliant upon something that you shouldn't have access to, which is sameness. Nothing is sameness. That's what your Hume is saying. It's all variable. It's all changing. Everything you've ever experienced is changing. You just have the illusion of sameness and identity through time.
Okay,
What do you
so
mean sameness and identity through time? Well, you took qualities of it that were the same and you found that convenient to think about. What do you mean they were the same? How can you observe the sameness of it? Okay, so I'll be
would
done with that, but I think you're making a good point.
would Hume say that on the example of the four, because that's what you draw a bit earlier, you think there is the illusion, if that is what Hume could have said, you have the illusion of sameness because of a quote unquote large scale impression that is in fact a social agreement which results in, regardless of how poorly or well drawn a four is, you there is the social agreement of that impression to forever represent the four, and whatever is above that notion, the
Well,
number, the letters, whatever the society has agreed to pile up to that four as whatever attributes. Because the more we evolve, we might or understand ancient philosophies and teachings of others, we probably added to four even the Pythagorean metaphysics. So every time we see four, we have that impression upon the symbol that it is a societal agreement to. I will not further explain it. I hope that you that you got my point, to not use too much of your time, and that you think you know the sameness, but in fact it's just a large scale impression, a societal agreement on a symbol. Could that be something that Hume would
okay.
say?
So I don't think he can say that without appealing to the similarities, right? So what he wants to do is say, look, this four and this four, there's nothing the same about them. Okay. If in fact, can I do that? Maybe we won't do that. All right. So this four and this four, there's nothing the same about them. There's an illusion in your mind that there's a sameness there, but hey, this object and this object right now, and this object right now, and this object right now, they're not the same either. All the molecules are changing. Everything is variable. Some of the molecules left, some other molecules came in. It's not the same damn thing. But because it's so small that you don't think it's significant, you see the similarities as more important than the differences. But you could, on a spectrum, eventually get to something so different that you would say they were different. Remember, this is his argument about the mountain. If you have a mountain and you throw a pebble on it, you don't say it's a different mountain. You say it's the same mountain with a pebble. But if you have a mountain and you take away 4/5 of the mountain, you say the mountain is dead, or it's a different mountain, or there's no mountain there anymore, or something like that, right? So there's a level of where the similarity is good enough and a level where it's too much. And he's saying it's just from the social conventions, the psychological convenience of how much similarity counts and blah blah blah. And he thinks he's destroying the idea of identity there, but it relies on a notion of similarity, right? You have to still think about sameness as a possibility to recognize how much is the same about this and this. Is, well, there's nothing the same about it. Well, there's something the same about it. The form is the same. There's a social convention. Okay, well, those things are the same. But wait a minute, aren't all social conventions different? Aren't all minds that are learning social conventions learning them differently? I mean, there's no sameness about anything because he's saying there's no identity. So you shouldn't, if he's correct, ever be able to recognize anything. And so he's saying it's an illusion because I can see through it. But the way he sees through it requires that you actually be able to do something that you shouldn't be able to do if he's correct. Right? There's a way in which if these fours keep changing, eventually, well, this one's still a four. Um, maybe that's not a four. Let's see. We'll try to draw it a little closer. Maybe we'll say that could still be a four, right? Eventually, there's a line where we go, this stuff over here counts as fours. This stuff over here doesn't count as fours. And David Hume is saying, look, break it down and realize that there's no actual line. It's not solid. You can't tell. So really, there's no identities between. There's no identity. And I think your original question is correct. And I think he might start to be suspecting that himself in this essay because he's going through a movement here where he's like, wait a minute, I've looked back on this and what I'm saying doesn't even work. But your criticism of what he's doing is, it lands. I don't think other criticisms of it would. Like, I think he's actually correct that there's nothing the same about this and this, right? Like, there's nothing the same about anything. It's all changing. You can't step in the same river once, right? It's everything is in flux and change that you are experiencing. Remember, he's limiting his knowledge to that which comes through experience, and he's rightly identifying that that is all of things in flux. There's some element of flux in it. Okay? But what that might mean is that all your knowledge doesn't come through experience. Because if it does, I think he's logically getting to a true absurdity, which is that you can't know anything. It's not absurd that you can't know anything, but he's getting to a true absurdity here, which is that you shouldn't even be able to notice that you can't know anything. You shouldn't even be able to understand what the problem is if it's really, really true. And yet you can even talk about the problem. And I think that is a problem. I think you've struck the hammer blow that might land on his essay here. And I want to mention that there are, excuse me, there are philosophical systems which swallow entirely everything he's saying, but it doesn't seem like a poison pill to them because they are finding a grounding of truth in something outside of what Hume thinks he wants to limit himself to.
It is like he has reached the point of a transcendental leap, not of faith, through his syllogism, a noetic transcendental leap, but he denies to do it because in a scientific manner, the lack of proof for him is the proof of absence. And since he has already dissolved identity through resemblance, contiguity, and causation, he denies continuity either when he referred to memory, either when he referred to contiguity, and even within the cause and causation field of actions, etc., impressions. So it feels like scientifically he cannot find the proof, so he denies everything else. It
Right.
feels like he knows it is there because, it even triggered to you the word discovers. Memory discovers identity through recognizing cause and effect. I think these were his words. Hopefully I noted them correctly.
You
it,
did.
it is like he he sees it, he might even feel it, but it seems like he just denies to do that transcendental step. I don't know.
Yeah, he does. He definitely denies. He doesn't think that would be a legitimate step to make. It's almost like he's the first philosopher to take Socrates' challenge of having that type of definitional knowledge that nobody could show that they actually have so seriously that he doesn't want to give it up. And it leads him to the same place that Socrates said, you don't know anything in that way. It doesn't mean you can't know anything for Socrates. It just means you can't know it in that way. But he doesn't want to give up the search. He wants to so I think it would be fair, one slight twist would be, it would be fair to say that he doesn't deny something just because he can't know it, but he denies the right to affirm it. Sometimes he seems to be denying it. So he does dance back and forth between the two. But it's skepticism. He's advocating for skepticism. It's like, don't say you know something unless you've got that, like you said, that solid proof trace backable to experience. And so he doesn't affirm things,
Yeah, but he denies to to
which is
to
deny.
to
Yeah,
he denies to enjoy, at least, or try to be within the paradox. It's like having
he does
the
deny.
seeing the dynamics of the end nodes. He it feels like he sees the paradox, knowing it is there, but having the scientific proof, and thus I am obliged to deny it. But he even denies the paradox. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, the paradox dissolves because he'll just live in a world without any of the things that I don't know if the sun's coming up tomorrow, so I don't know. I don't have reason to believe in identity or even myself. He doesn't he doesn't believe he exists. Um, as a continuous thing, he believes he exists as a series of perceptions. When those perceptions are happening, he flips into existence. Um, but
How
only
did
to the Go ahead.
how did Scott Adams describe delusion? It's, you're delusional when you have something additional, that something extra that you see. It was in
Yeah,
his book The
hallucination is
Elephant.
adding something, okay, right?
So regardless of the trails that Hume tries to walk and explore, he always ends up to that point. He sees just a delusion, a hallucination of an eye, and he just
Yeah.
goes on and explains why it is so.
The entire world is full of so this is great. So Scott Adams says if there's 99 people in a room and they see an elephant emerging through a wall, and there's one person in the room who says, "I don't see an elephant. I don't know what you're talking about." The 99 people are hallucinating because a hallucination adds something to reality. It doesn't take something away. And David Hume is saying there are 9 billion people on the planet saying that they know of a direct experience of their self. I don't see what the hell they're talking about. That you don't have that experience. You're having a hallucination. It's an illusion. It's a fantasy. It's not clear that he actually can make that argument though. There's something really admirable about the consistency and the commitment that he has in following the train of the consequences of what he affirmed about his empirical attitude. If it doesn't come through my senses, I can't say that I've experienced it, and so I don't know anything about it. And he follows that straight through to a point of, okay, it seems like nothing's real. There are no things. It's all a bunch of random manifestations of constantly fluxing. I'm not here as a person consistently observing it. I mean, he loses a lot by maintaining that commitment quite admirably. There was something that you said in the 20-minute conversation we had between these two classes, which is another. I think. I think it's a very profoundly insightful approach to David Hume as a character. Come up and say, okay, these arguments of yours, there's something to deal with there. They're powerful, they're impressive, they're something. But there's a you making this argument. And I'm curious about that you making the argument, especially since you're narratively going through a transformation here where you're saying all this stuff for 3 pages and then saying, I can't make sense out of everything I just said. So I guess I'll just double down on being a skeptic, since if even that seems like the correct logical consequence, and yet it doesn't seem consistent. Like, this isn't consistent. Objects aren't consistent. Even my argument isn't consistent. Nothing is something knowable. Um, well, okay, you're going through a journey here, buddy. It's maybe the journey that Nietzsche was talking about, the path of the loneliest possible path of the death and resurrection necessary, the thing Descartes wanted to dissolve everything away. There's like a death and a rebirth and a coming back into being in the world through this intense philosophical process. We might imagine David Hume has stared into the abyss and journaled what it looks like. Um, it seems like he's on the edge of staring into it long enough, right? Nietzsche said you stare into it long enough, it stares back into you. But there's something else that might happen if you really stare into it long enough. Um, and he's almost on the cusp of it, but it seems like he's chained to this commitment of empiricism, which is stopping him from noticing that he's a character, even bringing a a personal eye into his commitment to approach knowledge this way and truth this way. Like, there's something inextricable about it, that you can't get rid of. Like, okay, what are you doing, David Hume? Well, I'm like a robot that's just telling you logical consequences. Okay, maybe. Um, you could be that, by the way. That could be what he is. I mean, one of the ways I think about this is like David Hume is reading David Hume is like reading the most intelligent philosopher in Hades. Like, he's a shadow, admits he's a shadow, sees everything as insubstantial and can't grasp anything. Right? That's the poetic description of being in Hades. Well, that's a place you can be, right? That it's possible to be there. And this is what the world looks like if you're there. It doesn't mean it's the only thing the world looks like. It doesn't mean it's the ultimate truth or anything. It's just what it looks like to David Hume if he's happens to be sitting there. But we don't have David Hume here to ask him the question, because we'd have to ask him the question that Elena asked in the 20-minute conversation we had between these two classes, which I thought was really great, which is, well, you worded it better than this, I think, but what's motivating you? Like, what is this journey you're on, this philosophical journey of yours? Like, is there a reason for it? Is there an aim? Are you trying to get somewhere? Are you trying to manifest the courageous seeker of truth? There's nothing empirical about any of that. That's as non-empirical as the causation that would allow you to know that the sun is coming up tomorrow, right? There's something. Why do you want the truth? Why are you aimed at the truth? Why are you so bravely committed to staring it down, even if it looks too dark to even be a way of affirming that you exist, let alone anything else? And everything's crumbling apart here. What is it that makes you want to do that in the first place? Now, that's not to say, therefore, we don't have to consider your arguments. It's to say we are considering your arguments. We're saying, there's something else in the story here that you're pretending not to see, which is you're aimed at the truth for some reason, and you think it's important to be courageous and steadfast. I want the truth even if it kills me. Like, why? If you were just a robot designed by evolution to make it through life, doesn't seem like this is the sort of thing that you would even be able to discover. Even if it was the ultimate truth, you would have to be that sort of thing. And yet you can go on this journey to see these things from this perspective. So it must not be the ultimate truth, what you're talking about. It's like the snake eating its own tail here, which isn't to say that it isn't true or isn't an important part of the journey of truth, right? It's like anybody who's too afraid to look at this isn't going on the journey, right? So there's something quite heroic about what he's doing in more than one way, but that heroism is a characterological thing. It's in the framework of narrative. It's not the kind of thing that he could affirm if what he's saying is the ultimate truth. And yet he either is a dead robot shadow, and you just might say, well, it might be true of him, and I'm getting a report, or he is a character boldly and bravely saying, I'll face the truth even if it kills me, because that's what I want. But there's nothing empirical that would make you be that thing. You just are a manifestation of that commitment to the truth. And so it seems like David Hume's existence is a negation of his argument in a sense. Does that track? Maybe I didn't word it very well, but I think you were onto something when you brought that up. Really important, actually.
You worded it perfectly. And in fact, up to what we read to the previous time that we had a session last Monday, and the first part of today's session, it was profoundly, as you said, Hume is in the cave and he denies him even himself, and accepts only the shadows. And now to this final part of his essay, it's like I saw him consciously. Oh, I'm in the cave. There's nothing more than shadows, and there's a rabbit hole. Let's deep dive. And he went down to the most shadowy pits of opinion. Opinion, as Parmenides used to mentioned it, the path of the is not, which isn't. There is no non-being.
Yeah.
So, but he consciously he saw the rabbit hole and he just went in. And now we reached that state that you just said perfectly, the negation of himself. It's a great
Yeah.
this essay. I mean,
That's right.
Zara, thank you very much. I honestly appreciate it so much because it is quite an experience if you follow along and try, to quote unquote meditate along. You don't need to read Descartes' first meditations to actually meditate, or read Marcus Aurelius' meditations as to actually meditate. You can do it with every philosophical text or every freaking noetic trail.
Well,
And
this one
he's
will do it to you.
wonderful. He's marvelous
Mm.
to for the shadowiness of his trail.
He's diving into the grave. And this is
What an
exactly the same
experience.
meditative. Oh, sorry, what?
What an experience. And I haven't even understood him perfectly.
It's a hell. It's impressive as hell for sure. He's diving into the grave, not looking for anything except the bottom. This is exactly the same meditative method that Descartes was using. Descartes, there's passages where he goes, I'm trying to see the unrealness of things clearly enough that they actually disappear from me. And I've gotten to a point through he's inviting the meditation where everything feels like it's escaping. It's running away from him and nothing is real. He's in this he meant it, by the way. He was trying to induce it in us when we're reading it, but he was trying to go on this journey himself where psychologically the world disappeared from him. Now, if you're looking for something real, really real, maybe more real than a solid object, what you might try to do is be motivated like David Hume is in demolishing everything that can be demolished and then see what's left. You might find something more real. I remember there's a scriptural idea in one of the traditions. I think it's in Judaism. It might be in the Christian scriptures. The mountains can crumble, and yet we still have this connection with this infinite reality, this divine great I am. Like the whole world could disappear. I'm fine, right? That's the poetic description of it. But it's possible. I don't know. We'll leave it as an open question if it's possible to get there through philosophy. It's certainly not possible to get there through just reading philosophy. You actually have to go through the lonely journey yourself. But it also reminds me of yeah, it's the death and rebirth system. It's just David Hume's willing to just dive into the death grave and then just sort of stay there. And he denies that he can find anything, and maybe he can't, right? Maybe for him there is nothing more real than that. But notice you've said correctly, he's aimed at things not being. So there's a nihilism here for sure, including himself. He's denying self-existence. It's illusory, but to him. But you were also right when you said there is no non-being. Well, what happens when you're aimed at non-being and there is no non-being? That's hell. That's hell, right? If you're aimed at being, then being is fine, right? And you can make it better and you can whatever, but ultimate being is fine if you say yes to being. But if you say no to being, you're not getting out of it, right? So there's something very, very hellish about the position David Hume is in, I think. He's he's looking to, and I think he's failing philosophically. I don't think philosophically he's proving that there's nothing, but he's aimed at there being nothing, including himself. Maybe because he's searching for something really solid, but he's not affirming that he's found it. He might be manifesting it, right? You know what I mean? Like the fact that he's on this journey itself, like you said before, is an affirmation. We're not going to explore all the consequences of that and flush them out right now, perhaps. But I think very profoundly, it's the case that him not wanting illusions is a sign that there is something real, because if it's all illusions, there would be no capacity to want there not to be illusions, right? You couldn't understand a difference. If what he's saying is really true, it can't possibly be true because he exists and is exploring it, right? So maybe he does get out of it, maybe he's trying to get out of it, maybe he's not, but it doesn't work. um I don't know. It's heavy stuff because you have to actually see what happens is if you're too afraid to go on this journey, you never have the death and you never have the rebirth, right? There's not that phoenix moment, but there's a reason for people not wanting to go on the journey David Hume is going on. It seems terrifying, right? Because it's death, right? It's like, oh my God, even I'm not real kind of a thing. But he's obviously going it. He's doing it. You might ask why, right? And I don't mean why like, "Oh, that's stupid. Let's not do that. It seems stupid." No, I mean why. Like there's a good answer to the why. Why are you doing this? Why are you looking for something more real? It's almost like you exist in the mean between ultimate being and ultimate non-being, and you're on a journey. I mean, this is what the consummate thinkers were saying, right? This is what they were able to grasp that the other philosophers were wrestling with to one degree or another. We won't talk more about our second year conceptions, but you know what I'm referring to, Elena, right? So if Thales and Socrates and Descartes and Nietzsche and Kant were grasping at like the whole, like being crucified on the both extremes, neither of which seems to be sufficient, then the rationalists and the empiricists, the Anaximenean and the Anaximandrian, like these other methods of trying to grasp it from just one side are always going to be insufficient. But they tell a part of the story. It's like they're telling a wrong story because they can only tell one half of it. Um, I don't know. I don't want to keep rambling in that direction because we're referring to a lot of stuff that we talked about last year that we haven't really covered and we're not intending on covering. I just realized why we're going so much more in depth in this. This is the first time we've done this with someone who's been on the journey you've been on. You've spent a lot of time thinking about these things, but also we have the common language of the Consummate Thinkers course. So that's second and third year stuff is already part of how you're looking at this first year stuff. Um, it's definitely heavy. I
It's
think
like
David Hume is very impressive. All right, I'm going to shut up. Go ahead.
it's like he went on a meditation with the method of apheresis. Now, let me add a parenthesis. I went through an essay superficially, I admit. I do not remember who wrote it. It's a contemporary philosopher or an academic, a graduate, a teacher, a professor, I don't know. But he was examining the Aeneads of Plotinus, and he was trying to pinpoint throughout the Aeneads the meditations, the exercises, and the methods. So uh, he he recognized two primary methods of anavasis, which is upwards, and of apheresis, which is reduction. It's the deduction. And he acknowledged a third part, a third method, which he called agnoetic, and he truly means what Plotinus suggests as the non-discursive intuitive contemplation, as the third method of meditating. But now, in regards to Hume, to bring it to absolutely to topic, he said that apheresis, what I read, has the subjective way and the objective way, and it feels that Hume has already put an X on everything objective, and he demolishes everything subjective. He has completely erased everything objective and just started being deductive and demolishing everything of the subject along the subjective method of meditating while he's on his noetic journey. And it feels like at some point he just reached the point of his internal abyss in a Nietzschean way. In a, with a
What is
Nietzschean,
an abyss?
what is an abyss?
Yeah, his internal what? What does that mean?
His internal abyss. I mean, it is a point
Oh,
where
abyss. Abyss. I'm sorry. I
abyss.
see you. Yes, 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 yes.
In Greek, it is avisos.
I
I'm
got you.
sorry for okay,
I just
okay.
misunderstood. I'm with you. Okay,
All
yes.
right. It's like he just witnessed his internal abyss, and is that where the essay ends? To the
Well, we're
point
gonna
of
finish it.
woe? Ah, okay.
We're gonna finish it. We're almost done. We don't know where it's gonna end, but were you gonna say where you think it might end?
Um, I think he's gonna go blindfold, close his eyes, and just go on to continue upon the main point, his main point
Okay.
of negation, of
Okay, good.
nothingness,
So
no
let's
identity.
yeah, so let's see. So what is he serving in philosophy by doing this, right? Because historically he's coming in and you keep saying, and you're correct, that he's in Plato's cave, denying there's an outside Plato's cave, staring at the shadows and saying that's all there is, even to the point of saying, I don't exist to see them. Whatever I am is just my participation with the shadows. It's like he's holding us right there in the cave saying, "Look at the shadows. This is all you really know. This is all you can really know. Just this and nothing else." Well, he might be demanding that we come up with a good enough answer to that. If we refuse to dive into that abyss, right? If we refuse to go there, it seems too scary. Maybe I won't have an answer or something. We're not going to have the answer, right? The degree Nietzsche had this phrase, this idea. Your roots have to descend to the deepest depths in order for your heights to grow as high as the highest heights, right? Jung also said the same thing, but he was a creation of Nietzsche in a lot of ways, right? So Nietzsche said, "My roots have to go down all the way into hell if my branches are going to reach into heaven here." So I'm only going to know the highest if I can get what I need to get from diving into the deepest abyss. And we'll see how the essay ends, but David Hume is demanding that we go deeper. He's demanding that we go as deep as possible. And he's already admitted that there's something wrong with what he's saying. It can't be the ultimate truth. There has to be something else besides this, not because he wants there to be, not because it's terrifying to him, not because he wishes it wasn't the case. He's absolutely fine to, with open eyes and courage, say, "This is all I see. This is all I see." But it's like he's demanding that we demonstrate why it's wrong. And he's also noticing, wait a minute, the reason why this is all I can see is dependent upon my knowing something that I shouldn't be able to know. Like, I shouldn't even be able to see the problem is this difficult unless it isn't really the ultimate truth that this is the place we're in. We're just stuck here and there's no answer. There's like, he's already begun to see that there has to be an answer, not because he wants one. He's happy to say, "This is all I know." There's no flinching in him, right? He's not cowardly about it. He's not like, "Oh, I wish this wasn't the case." He's like, "Fuck it, man. Look at the consequences. This is what we know, and this is all we can know, it seems." Right? So it's not like he just, "Oh, I wish that wasn't true. I'll look at it for a minute and run away." But he is at the same time saying, with my eyes pried open, staring at this, everything I've been arguing that this is all there is wrong. It's not even consistent with itself. How could I have made these observations in the first place? I admit I can't make sense out of it, but what I'm doing right now, this is my role. My job is so that we really look at the heart of the nothingness until we discover what the answer is, right? In other words, I don't want an answer that works because it's good enough because it grew up this high because it was only rooted in this much depth. I want the full possible depth that I can get to. And that's playing a role. So we'll see where he ends up. I think he just ends up with the it's like he doesn't provide answers, he's just trying to get us to see how bad the problem could possibly be, right? And then even when he does that, he doesn't say, "This is all there is and there is no answer." He just says, he says, "Don't give up. Don't give up the commitment to a lesser answer that would pretend to be the ultimate answer because it's still an illusion. If I can knock it down as an illusion, it isn't good enough. We need something more real than that." That's powerful, right? There's something quite lovely about the fact of someone's commitment to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that either, by the way, right? There is an answer, but it has to be the answer to the biggest, worst possible problem. And it isn't an answer to that unless you have engaged in the biggest, worst possible problem, right? If the problem doesn't go right down to your toes, the answer doesn't have to either, right? You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
All right, let's see where he goes. When we talk of self or substance, we must have an idea next to these terms. Otherwise, they are altogether unintelligible. Every idea is derived from preceding impressions. That's his commitment. And we have no impression of self nor of substance as something simple and individual. We have, therefore, no idea of them in that sense. Whatever's distinct, and so I almost want to pause here. Um, I had mentioned that there are philosophical perspectives that come later which have fully swallowed everything that Descartes is, or that David Hume, I'm so sorry, that David Hume is saying here, and it doesn't feel like a poison pill to them. It's completely integrated into a life affirming, positive idea of truth and meaning and all of that stuff. One of them, Nietzsche totally follows this too, by the way. I wasn't thinking of him exactly, but let's go to one of the camps that is born out of existentialism. Says, okay, okay, the thing in itself, I don't know. I can't have access to the thing in itself. I can have access to the impressions made upon me by the thing I posit as being there, doing that impression making. But really, I only have access to the fact of the impressions. It's not just true of myself, it's true of the chair. It's true of the table. It's true of whatever. Take away the things the table is doing, and there ain't no table there anymore to talk about the thing in itself. So you can say there's nothing there. Or you can say all being is relational. There's nothing unless there's two things relating to each other. There is no such thing as oneness. There's a trinity at the base of being. There has to be two things chasing or pointing at each other, mutually affecting each other. The act of observing disturbs the observed, as our scientists are starting to discover, right? The perspective that you could be outside the world and see it and measure it and know it in that objective way was wrong. You aren't outside it, you're a part of it. But you know that you're real. So why presume that everything else isn't? You know you're not like the things. Well, okay, let's not go down that road right now because it's a pretty good road. It's a different point though. Maybe David Hume is correct that there is no self except that it is in relationship with other selves. That's what he
So,
means. You're having perceptions, but that's more like love. That's more like communication between is the ultimate reality,
so
which requires that there be more than one thing. Go ahead.
what is of a self is only perceived or understood with heterospecification, and what you are or what one man is just the proportion to the whole of his whole, to the whatever whole, meaning having in
Yes.
mind
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
example with the pebble and the mountain. You
Your
are
existence. Go ahead. Yeah.
you are a heterospecification. If you want to find an identity, there is no pure identity or a self or a consciousness. There is just heterospecification amongst all being, and you are the you, quote unquote you, is just the proportion of the whole.
The idealists and the materialists are wrong. There is no one thing. The one thing that is at the base of being is a trinity. It's a yin yang symbol of two incompatibles and the line between them, the chasing between them, the love perspective, the aiming at that which is the opposite of what you are. That's what it takes to be. If it's all one thing, then there's nothing. Oneness dissolves into zero, whether it's all mind or all body. And you can say, well, being a materialist means that there's lots of things. No, it means there's one thing because um, an electron, let's just start with an electron. Let's just deal with an electron. An electron is one thing. It's an identity. There's only one electron. If there was the only way there could be more than one electron is if they weren't the same thing. So they're an identity. That electron is in lots of different places and perceived at different times. But if it really is identical to all other electrons, there's only one. So whatever the base of whatever you want to think of as material, whatever. The point is, our conceptions of the material, it's going to keep evolving. The it's all body or it's all mind is both wrong. It turns out that that those don't work. The idealist idea, the idea that it's just one brain dreaming it all because it wants something to do or to pretend it's doing or something, it doesn't actually work. That dissolves into a nihilistic oneness. As David Hume is pointing out, the opposite oneness, the other side of the paisley of the yin yang symbol, dissolves into nothingness. The oneness is nothingness. If it's just, if it's just if your commitment is that you can only know things by the way they come to your sense through your senses, if you're aimed at trying to be objective about a world outside yourself, and so you can only know it through this, you lose everything. There's nothing there. It turns out what there is there's the communication between two incompatible opposites. You can't have you can't have anything with that if you only have oneness. And we don't have time to talk about it right now, but two-ness dissolves into oneness, and oneness dissolves into zero-ness. You don't get a universe just from duality either. There has to be a trinity at the base of it. It's like saying you need three dimensions to tie a knot. And if you only have two dimensions, everything will dissolve back down again. It's an analogy. It might be a reflection of the ultimate thing we're talking about, but it's an analogy for now. Um, there's infinite being. Let's go to the mythopoets. There's the great I am, and then there's this chaotic, constantly variant, messy ocean of potentiality, which is how David Hume is only going to look at that side of things, right? He's refusing to look at anything that isn't that. That's all he wants to affirm. So he's looking at the yin yang symbol purely from one Paisley and at one Paisley. And maybe an idealist is looking at it purely from the other one. And Nietzsche points out that they both contain nihilism in them, including the everything is God and everything else is nothing compared to him. They're both nihilistic. However, if there are these two things and the potentiality, which is not actual, so it's not real, but it's a weird kind of realness because potentiality is things trying to be real, right? It's popping into being. That's non being aimed at being. And if the ancient mythopoetry of the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters, the other thing, the chaotic ocean of potentiality, interested in that which has limitation, he's unlimited. He's the great I am, the unchanging one. The thing that we have a sense of when he says we posit that our self is unchanging and invariant, right? David Hume is saying we have this idea, but that has to be illusory because all I see is this. Well, if you're made of dust and clay with a spark of the divine, as the ancient Greek mythopoetry says, as the Egyptian prophecy we read in our consummate thinkers course says, if I mean if all of these all of the perspectives to try to describe what it's like to be in the world that made it possible for us to invent philosophy and science and to build cathedrals and pyramids instead of being rock wielding poop throwing apes, those stories are all getting at the idea that we exist. They're depicting us as existing as in the mean between these two things, and either one of them is not existence. What is real is the love dance between those two things. And if you look at just one of them, it does dissolve into nothingness. David Hume's commitment is to look at just the one curved edge of the, let's say, the black paisley, right? And an idealist, or a certain conception of the divine, that it is all and we are nothing, and it's, it's like, it's complicated. I'm not going to do theology right now because I don't do it as well as others. But Nietzsche suggested that there are two wrong ideas. One wrong idea is that God is alone and horrified and lonely, so he made up stuff to look at. That's not true. Said he's in love with the other thing that is, which is that potentiality, and it's extreme without God before he comes to sacrifice, to make himself limited, to develop logos so that there can be communication between the two. Before he does that, he's aimed at this other thing that's also there, and that other thing that's also there is aimed at being. It's popping into being. It's trying to be something. So it's like infinite being and infinite nothingness. But either one alone is not what is. And either one alone would be nothing. There would be nothing here with either one alone, is sort of the idea. Um, but he denies that. He denies that it's nihilism on one side and he denies that it's nihilism on the other. He says both of them are affirmative. Both of them are aiming at something. They're aiming at what they're not, the other thing that's there. So you have the left, the right, and the love dance between them, the line between the Paisleys. You have the logos, the communication between the two. That is, well, in the myth, that's the creation story. So when you're asking the question, what is and how did it come to be? What is really real? What those ancient mythopoetic inspired revelatory storytellers were saying is, well, they were saying more than this. They were saying at least as much as saying, I think, that it's love, but not in a hippie, stupid, lame sort of a way. the foundational, the thing that's more real than this, that's more real than something you can knock on, that's more real than your mind alone. The thing that's more real is the communicative story. So if your relationship to the chair is more real than you or the chair alone, that's kind of a consequence, right? It's a consequence of this idea that if you want to look at it just as one thing, you end up with nothing. And he's starting to get a hint of that. He's starting to notice that. So what made me go off on that was what we just read here. So let's see. No impression of the self as something individual. We have therefore no idea of them as sense. Whatever is distinct and distinguishable, whatever is distinguishable is separable without imagination. All perceptions are distinct. Therefore, they're distinguishable and separable and may be conceived as separate and different. All right, he's totally diving into that ocean of chaos. He's completely diving in that direction and saying, "Hey, this seems to be a part of what makes us up. What are the consequences? If I only look at this, what do I see?" Now, he sees everything fall apart. He even sees that it falls apart so much that he shouldn't even be able to see that it falls apart if this is all there is. Like there's evidence that it isn't all there is in the fact that he shouldn't even, if it was all there was, we wouldn't be here. And also he wouldn't be able to notice the things he's noticing, even to make the story of how we can imagine there to be something there. If all you're willing to consider is the one half of the paisley, you just got blackness. You don't have the shape, you don't have the line, you don't have its relationship, you don't have you don't have a thing. All right. And if all you have is whiteness, you don't have a thing, right? Either paisley is nothing if there's nothingness, if all it is just that. But you don't have that. You could look at it not from either side there alone, although remember, there are philosophers who look at it from just one side and say this is an affirmative thing. But you can look straight on and to see the line between them and say, now we got the answer. All right. The answer isn't this idealist, because they're losing the world too. They're losing the reality. And well, again, we did the second and third year stuff with the consummate thinkers course, so I know you know what we're talking about here. But for the recording, we're just doing this year one stuff. So maybe we'll stop. I know you and I have had an ongoing conversation for over a year about this, but for anybody being introduced to it, we did a year-long study. Well, we did 3-month-long study looking in year 2 and year 3. We'll get into all that content. For now, let's try to finish this essay. It's getting late. When I view this table and that chimney, nothing is present to me but particular perceptions, which are of a like nature with all the other perceptions. This is again, how do you know they're alike, right? He's starting to see that he shouldn't be able to make this observation, but this is the doctrine of philosophers. But this table, which is present to me, and that chimney may and do exist separately. This is the doctrine of the vulgar and implies no contradiction. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe he's getting a glimpse. You are wondering where this is going. Maybe he's getting a glimpse of what we were just talking about. Hold on. He's telling two different stories now. Let's read it again. When I view this table and this chimney, nothing is present to me but particular perceptions, the shadows I'm seeing, which are of a like nature with all other perceptions. This is the doctrine of philosophers. This is the thing he's been affirming his entire essay. But this table, which is present to me, and that chimney he says, it's possible that they do exist separately. And then he says, and they do exist separately. So they may and do exist separately. This is the doctrine of the average person, right? This is the common sense understanding. Of course, this is one thing and this is another. Like, this is why some people look at philosophy and they go, what the fuck? You're trying to figure out if these are two different things. I see that they're two different things, right? And they think that's all there is to it. But going on this journey is going to give us some understanding, and it's quite enlightening. So this is the doctrine of the vulgar, and it implies no contradiction. So that's a new statement. That's a parenthetical to what he just said. Wait a minute. He just said the one perspective that sees them as different and the other's perspective that understands they're just a series of perceptions don't contradict each other. Okay? So he's committed to being philosophical, which he thinks means you have to think in the way he thinks. Obviously, you don't, but he thinks you have to be committed to this idea that there's the perceptions and nothing else. But then he says there's another way of thinking about it that just average people common sense view. There's nothing contradictory between the two. Okay. In other words, there's nothing I've discovered over here that tells me that other view is wrong. Okay. So he's being skeptical. He's saying, I'm not going to affirm things I don't know unless I really know them. But he said, one of the things I don't know is that regular view is wrong. I haven't discovered that. There is no contradiction, therefore, in extending the same doctrine to all the perceptions. I think he means the vulgar doctrine. In general, the following reasoning seems satisfactory. All ideas are borrowed from preceding perceptions. Our ideas of objects, therefore, are derived from that source. We've experienced and perceived objects. That's why we have an idea of objects. Consequently, no proposition can be intelligible or consistent with regard to objects, which is not also with regard to perceptions. You can't say anything about objects unless you realize you only know objects because you've been perceiving them. So you have to understand the nature of perceptions to talk about objects. But it is intelligible and consistent to say that objects exist distinct and independent from one another without any common simple substance or subject of adhesion. Okay, let's see where he goes. It might be very different from where we were going to try to solve the problem. Let's see what he's saying here. We'll read the last sentence, then we'll look at this again. This proposition, therefore, can never be absurd with regard to perceptions. Okay, pause. You only know objects because you've had perceptions of them. That's what he thinks. Now we understand, and we've hinted at the idea that there are existentialists, pragmatists, people who understand that you actually can't perceive an object unless there's something characterological or embodied going into it. That all is in a different thing that we're going to look at another time. Let's get into David Hume's world here. In David Hume's world, I know this is an object because I've seen lots of objects before. My perceptions of the objects are what allow me to have a notion of objects in the first place. There's and then he says, I notice that I understand perceptions as all basically the same kind of they're all shadows, right? He said, I know shadows, all of the shadows are very shadowy, right? There's a sameness about all of the shadowness. So how do I know there's a difference between the objects when they only come to me in shadow form? And then he says, but the average everyday person understands that these are two different things. And then he says, what I know from my commitment to this shadow thing doesn't contradict that they could and are two different things. I don't know that they're not. All I have access to is through the perception. So it's all just shadow world that I can affirm. But that doesn't mean that what I've learned through that, what I can affirm, is enough to deny this other thing. And then he says, and of course, they're two different things. That's true, and it doesn't contradict what I've been saying about the nature of perceptions and my access to nothing except of things through perceptions. He thinks that doesn't contradict the common sense view. And then he says, if these two things can be different, why can't two of the shadows be different from one another? Why can't that also apply to my perceptions? Why can't my perception of one thing be different from my perception of another thing? I mean, I only know things through perceptions, and I'm not contradicting. I have no reason to contradict that things can be different, that there can be two different things. So perceptions could be different. Maybe they have to be different. All right. So he's going to try to swallow the tail of the snake in this other way. So let's see how this works. So let's look at this now. All ideas are borrowed from preceding perceptions. Our ideas of objects are therefore derived from perceptions. Consequently, no proposition can be intelligible or consistent with regard to objects, which is not so with regard to perceptions. Okay, so here's what he's saying. You can't say anything about objects that's true unless it's also true of the perceptions. So he wants to limit what we think we can know about objects to things that are also applying to perception, since that's the only way that we come to know objects in the first place. But it is intelligible and consistent to say that objects exist distinct and independent. It is intelligible and it doesn't contradict anything I've said so far, which I'm not sure is true. It is intelligible and consistent to say that objects exist distinct and independent without any common, oh, here it is, this point, without any common simple substance or subject of adhesion. Okay, so let's pause. This is what he was trying to knock down. He was trying to knock down that there is a substance, that there is a thing in itself. And he's saying you can understand consistently and intelligibly that objects can exist distinct from each other without the notion. This was the whole point of his essay originally. He's going to say all of the things that we thought were consequences of what he's seeing are not really consequences of what he's seeing. So he might want to just pull you and I back a bit and say, wait, you thought I was erasing the whole world. All I'm erasing is the notion of the thing in itself. That's all I'm doing. I'm not saying that this thing is not this thing, that this thing is different from this thing. That can still happen. That's true of my perceptions. And it can be true of the objects that I infer exist through those perceptions. They can be different, but they aren't a thing. There's not a substance of the thing that makes impressions upon me. All there are those impressions. All I have still are the shadows. So he's trying to prime our intuitions to say, wait a minute, Elena, Zara, you've gone off the deep end over here. You thought that a consequence of what I was saying was that we have to dive into some horrible abyss. Oh, no, it's not like that. No, there's no self, there's no substance to things, but the things are still identifiable and intelligible and distinct from each other. You just have to give up that fantasy you have that there's a thing there that's doing the stuff it's doing, that there's a you there that's having the perceptions. That's all you have to give up. So he's trying to prime our intuitions that we're not going to lose anything if we conclude that he's right, that there is no self. When I turn my reflections on myself, I never can perceive this self without some one or more perceptions of other things, right? Nor can I ever perceive anything but those perceptions. It is the composition, the collection, the tying a knot around all of these, therefore, which forms the self. My idea of myself is just me tying a knot around all the things that happened to me and that I seem to be doing. But there was no me to which they were happening, and there was no me doing them. There's just all that collection of things tied through memory. That's what I mean by me. It's just, it's not real in the way that the perceptions were real. I have no access to it, but it's a convenient use of language. Just tie a knot around all the stuff that I was seeming to do or that seemed to happen to me or that I have memory of happening. That's really, I do have the memory of it happening, right? The perceptions were real. They were really, really real. I've never perceived myself. I just see the perceptions. The perceptions are all that I have access to. Okay. We can conceive a thinking being to have either many or few perceptions. So let's pause here and say, why did Elena and I think that there were all these other consequences? Because there are. I think because we're correct. But another answer might be because we're the sorts of thinkers inclined to feel that way, and David Hume isn't. He's the sort of thinker who's completely content and happy and doesn't feel like he's lost anything of value that was necessary. He doesn't feel like he's in a crazy ocean of hell and everything's dissolving or anything like that. So, oh, this is easy. I can just straightforwardly see there is no box that I dropped. There's the dropping. The dropping is how I know the box is there. The noise it makes when it hits the table, that's what the box is and nothing more, right? It's those perceptions. I am a lake, and if you throw a pebble in, ripples happen. The rippling is the proof of the pebble, right? That's it's a bad analogy because you could still find the pebble, but the sounds that make the thing ripple, the rippling is what's real. The sound making it happen shows it to be real, but there's no sound in itself, and there's no lake in itself. There's just the doings, or the making of felt, or something like that. We know from the Consummate Thinkers course and from the third year material where we went through Nietzsche's Zarathustra that Nietzsche affirms this doctrine, by the way, but it's a phenomenology, right? It's a phenomenological perspective. But he certainly swallows whole everything that David Hume is saying here. All right. We won't go into that. We can conceive a thinking being to have either many or few perceptions. Suppose the mind to be reduced even below the life of an oyster. Suppose it to have only one perception, maybe thirst or hunger. Consider it in that situation. Do you conceive anything but merely that perception? All right. Imagine something less sophisticated consciously than even an oyster. It's a blob in the ocean that sometimes feels hungry and sometimes doesn't. Okay. It doesn't even have actions it can take to go find food. It just floats around. Sometimes enough food penetrates its semi permeable membrane of its skin, and then it feels sated. Sometimes it doesn't have enough and it feels hunger with no motivation to action because it doesn't do anything else. It's just there as a consciousness that's to the level of sometimes I feel hungry. And that's it. He says, think about what it would be. Think about what conception you have. Remember, he's doing rationalist experiments with his empirical commitment here. It's really kind of he's no lightweight. He's not some dumb cartoon figure who's just saying, I affirm it's all empirical and that's it. He's really trying to dive into this. And he's saying, think about what you can conceptualize that creature's consciousness to be. He says you're not gonna he thinks you're never gonna come up with anything except feeling hungry sometimes. Is there a thing that's feeling hungry? Not if it doesn't feel hungry. What if it couldn't feel hungry? Is there any consciousness left? No. So the only consciousness, the only thing, the only self, the only mind is present when it's having that experience of feeling hungry. Take that away, nothing's rippling, nothing's vibrating. There's no consciousness there anymore. The if all it could do is sometimes feel hungry and sometimes not, it seems to turn on only when it's feeling hungry. Take away its ability to feel hungry, can you conceptualize a mind there at all? It doesn't have the ability to think about itself, to reflect, to have other feelings. You took away its last one. Where's the
That is
mind?
that is what I do not understand. How can he um, deny the state of not feeling hungry, not necessarily having the impression of being or feeling content, but the absence of impressions isn't that a state of being of the I? I cannot get
Yeah.
how he absolutely
You
denies
think
that.
so. He denies that. You think so, and he thinks he doesn't deny that you understand what you're talking about, but he says, I don't understand it. I can't imagine that. Yeah, he's done that from the beginning. He says, if I try to think about the I with no perceptions, I don't know what we're talking about. And I looked in myself and I couldn't find anything like that. Now, maybe you do. He says there are philosophers who talk about Descartes. He said, let's get rid of everything else. There's a me here and there's a God here, and I'm relating to him. Meditation after meditation, he discovered things. And David Hume says, I think that might be true of you. It isn't true of me. And if it's true of you, I don't know how we can have a conversation where we could convince each other. You just seem like a different kind of creature if that's true of you, because I've tried, I've closed my eyes, I've tried to think about what it could even mean, the self without any of these perceptions. I'm left with a blank. It seems like nothingness to me, he says.
Okay, and I have one more question before you finish the essay. Did he subtly suggest to explore and understand and study the nature of perception as to be able to truly understand the objects, or to be able to to discern between the shadows?
Okay. All he knows of himself is the perceptions, and all he knows of the objects are the perceptions. It's shadows both way, right? He doesn't know
Wait,
that the cave wall exists except for the shadows either.
wait a moment. Wait a moment. All he knows of himself is perception, and all he knows of objects is the impressions of the shadows. All right.
Yeah. So he denies that he's in the cave and he denies the cave. He just the shadows. So it's really, I really like what you ended last class with asking, well, where does he fit in Plato's cave? Because I think it's a perfect, we're really going to get a real picture of his philosophy with that story. Uh, David Hume is in the deepest part of the cave, staring at the shadows, denying that he's sitting there staring at the shadows, affirming that the shadows are real, and he denies that there's a wall that the shadows are on. The shadow is all he knows of the objects. The shadow is all he knows of himself. Right?
But if he, oh, come on, I mean, I'm gonna scorch more cells. If he is seeing a shadow and he acknowledges that it is the shadow of an object, okay, and he sees himself as a shadow, where the fudge is the equivalent object? I mean,
So, okay,
the
right,
eye.
right. So you're predicting where Kant is going to go to solve. So David Hume comes and he makes the problem as hard as he can possibly make it, and then Kant comes along to try to solve all of Hume's problems here. And he's basically, that's why he's our next consummate thinker, because the crisis of the two ways of wrestling with the last consummate thinker gets so extreme, just like it does between the sophists and the Parmenideans after Socrates does his thing. Just or wait, I'm getting all of the repeats of this poetry messed up. Okay, hold on. Yeah. So just like after Thales does his thing, the sophists and the Parmenideans, it gets so extreme that it's like, is this even thinkable anymore? What's happening as you're trying to wrestle with this consummation that was happening in Thales? Um, Descartes comes along as he's restarting this whole thing up by stretching out and momentarily grasping both sides of this thing, and then the two paths of rationalism and empiricism start, and David Hume is at that extreme end of, is this even thinkable? Like you're being committed to trying to understand it from one of the two paths available to you, but it's so extreme. What we need is the next consummate thinker. And so he sets the stage to make it possible for this cycle to repeat again, where Kant comes in, and you're predicting part of the way that Kant dissolves all of these problems. So, but that's not David Hume's role. David Hume's role is to show us how extremely opposite the two ends of this cross are, that the consummate thinkers are having to be crucified on, right?
He is
Just
wonderful.
just to use this language again that only you and I are going to know, because when we get through all of year one, we will be going into the year two and year three stuff, everybody who's watching this. So Elena and I are talking about some of that stuff from those future years. But right now, all we're trying to do is just understand each of these essays and do this 101 part of it. But yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's the role he's playing characterologically and in the narrative of this philosophical conversation, which, by the way, like everything, has to reflect, if there is an arche, what that arche is. And guess what? It's a dance between two incompatibles. It's a dance between two incompatibles. And David Hume is showing us the extreme one end of this. We need the reunification, and that's where Kant comes in. Um, Okay, so this is fun. I'm so glad you're doing this with me, and I'm actually really glad that I forgot to record the first time we went through this because this is really great. Okay. We can conceive a thinking being as to have either many or few perceptions. Suppose the mind to be reduced even below the life of an oyster. Suppose it to have only one perception, such as thirst or hunger. Consider it in that situation. Do you conceive anything but merely that perception? Have you any notion of self or substance? If not, the addition of other perceptions can never give you that notion. Okay, is really taking it down. He's saying, look, you have lots of perceptions. You're tying knots around them all. You're saying, look, I'm a self. But all you're tying knots around, all he's willing to grant is a variety of perceptions, all of them varied and different. Different in quality, but even the same quality, hunger on one day, hunger differently on another day. All of it's variant, all of it's changing. Your idea of yourself is of something that's unchanging, that's consistent. How do you get that if all you are perceptions? Well, maybe you're wrong, but how do you get that idea if all you are perceptions? He says, look, think about something with the ability to only have one perception. It's floating in the ocean, and sometimes it feels warm and sometimes it feels cool. It has a sense of let's stick with the hunger. It has a sense of hunger sometimes, and sometimes it has a sense of satiety of not being hungry. Those are two perceptions. It's one perceptive faculty. He says, okay, take that one away. What the fuck is left? What's left to that mind? It doesn't feel the water. It only felt hunger and non-hunger. So it never felt the water. It never felt the movement. It never had any other perceptions. It doesn't have vision or sound or electromagnetic sensory organs. It has nothing else. Just sometimes it feels hungry, sometimes it doesn't. Take away that one perception. What are you talking about? Where is the consciousness? If that's all there is the perception, you're more complicated than that. You're a bunch of perceptions. You're a whole lot of them. And you see the similarity of perceiving. So you tie a knot around all of that. And then you have this illusion that because you tied a knot around things that were the same, you have an illusion that the self, which only comes into your imagination through the fantasy of tying the knot around those things, that self is unchanging and same like for no other reason. Because if you can't get the self from the one perception, how can a billion perceptions give you a self? There's nothing of the self in it. So it's just an illusion. Again, mostly we're trying to focus on what each thinker thinks, and we're going to get to the next essays of people who have arguments from other perspectives. But our conversation is quite good, and I'm glad we're having it. So this is what he's saying. The annihilation which some people suppose to follow upon death and which entirely destroys this self is nothing but the extinction of all particular perceptions, love and hatred, pain and pleasure, thought and sensation. Those things stop, and that's what it means to be dead, to not be. These, therefore, must be the same with the self, since the one cannot survive the other. I'm not sure if that works as a syllogism, but let's look at it again. If total eradication is what you have when you die, and when you die, all of your perceptions cease, then that's all you are, is the perceptions. You must be nothing other than those perceptions, since not having them anymore means you're dead. Or when you die, they all stop. Again, that doesn't seem logically to follow. Obviously, you could imagine. We'll look at this. We've been doing this too long, but we might want to look at that syllogism and say, wait a minute, does that really follow? But okay. Is self the same with substance? If it be, how can that question have place concerning the substance of self under a change of substance? If they be distinct, what is the difference betwixt them? For my part, I have a notion of neither when conceived distinct from particular perceptions. So he's lobbing another bomb at the people who think that there is a self and a substance. Oh, is your self a substance? just like you think there's a substance to this, which he denies, right? Is what makes you like a thing? Like, are you a thing that can perceive? Are you the ball of Play-Doh that impressions are made upon it from time to time? He goes, all I know about the ball of Play-Doh is that impressions are happening. I don't know about a substance of a self. But okay, let's consider the self and the substance. Are they the same? I don't have any idea about substance or of self. I can't see that those things mean anything. But you want to say that your self is a substance. He says, well, to you, I say, are they identical? Are they the same? Or is there a difference between them? If there's a difference between them, what's the difference? If they're the same, how can you even ask? Like, why ask the question, are they the same, if all they mean is the same thing, right? I mean, it's like saying, is this box the box? Like, for my part, I don't even know what the two terms mean. Philosophers begin to be reconciled to the principle that we have no idea of external substance distinct from the ideas of particular qualities. This must pave the way for a like principle with regard to the mind, that we have no notion of it distinct from the particular perception. So let's pause. Hey, you unmuted. What's up?
No, no, I'm sorry. I have my microphone closed on the headset.
Okay,
It
that's
will.
fine.
Okay.
So let's read that paragraph again. He's summing up everything he's been saying. He only has two more things to say. So philosophers begin to be reconciled to the principle that we have no idea of external substance except from the ideas of particular qualities. This is something we talked a lot about in one of our side lectures in that Consummate Thinkers course, right? We said, take the table, take all the things the table is doing. Prove to me there's a table there, the thing in itself. Well, let's take away all the things the table is doing. It's pretty clear there's nothing there, right? So the things that are to the degree that they can make themselves felt. Okay, he says philosophers are starting to catch on to that. What I, David Hume, want to suggest is the same thing applies to you. You are to the degree that you can make yourself felt, and you are to the degree that you are feeling things, but there's no you beyond that. That was an illusion. He might be right about that in a sense, right? Like your conception of self might shift into something very different than what it used to be. It's paving the way for phenomenalism. It's phenomenology. It's paving the way for some things that don't suffer from the nihilism that seems to be suggested the first time we try to take a look at something like this. But in any case, let's move on. We know what he's saying now. He summed it up quite well there. So far, I seem to be attended with sufficient evidence. But having thus loosened all our particular perceptions, when I proceed to explain the principle of connection, which binds them together and makes us attribute to them a real simplicity and identity, I am sensible that my account is very defective, and that nothing but the seeming evidence of the precedent reasonings could have induced me to receive it. If perceptions are distinct existences, they form a whole only by being connected together. But no connections among distinct existences are ever discoverable by human understanding. We only feel a connection or determination of the thought to pass from one object to another. It follows, therefore, that the thought alone feels personal identity. When reflecting on the train of past perceptions that compose a mind, the ideas of them are felt to be connected together and naturally induce each other. However extraordinary this conclusion may seem, it need not surprise us. Most philosophers seem inclined to think that personal identity arises from consciousness, and consciousness is nothing but a reflected thought or perception. The present philosophy, therefore, has so far a promising aspect. But all my hopes vanish when I come to explain the principles that unite our successive perceptions in our thought and consciousness. I cannot discover any theory which gives me satisfaction on this head. Okay, you were asking, where is he going? You were asking, what is the point of this journey, and is it true, and where are you headed? Well, what he's saying is, look, it seems like there's a way out of this hell. Okay? It seems like there's a way full circle here. It seems obvious that there must be. I'm getting hints of the idea of what the answer could possibly be. And yet, the story I tell of how we come to have the illusory idea of the self or the substance makes me feel like we'll never answer the question. Because if that's true, well, then there's nothing left to explain. Okay. So he's saying, I can tell that there's something wrong about my argument. Okay. He said, I can see the defectiveness of it, right? He can tell there's something wrong here. But he also says, I'm not going to stop affirming everything I've noticed that got me here. I'm not going to give up on that. I'm committed to the truth, and that all seems true to me. I don't know what the answer is. I think there must be one. But if there is, there must be something wrong with his story about how we come up with the idea of substance and self. Because as soon as he thinks of that, he thinks, well, I've explained it all away. There's just nothing. But there can't be. It just can't actually be true. And he can see why. He can see there's something inherent in his argument that relies upon the opposite of the conclusion of his argument. He sees that there's a defect in it, but he doesn't know what the answer is. So one of the there's a lot that's impressive about David Hume, but one of the most impressive things about him, one of the more impressive things about him is the fact that he's okay not having the answer yet or even in his lifetime. He wants the thinking process to be correct, right? He doesn't want to deny things that he sees clearly just because he doesn't like the conclusions. He doesn't want to deny them even if he thinks that the argument that they're true is wrong, if it's also the best argument he has so far. He wants only this argument to be replaced only by something better. I mean, he's a philosopher. It's a heck of a thing, but he's not going to say, "Look, obviously this isn't true. Obviously it can't be right. So I'll just go around not knowing but imagining I know and going along with illusions and whatever to make it through the day." He's not motivated by any of that. He's not motivated by it, and he also won't allow it to happen. He goes, show me a better argument, or this is what I'm going to keep saying. He's got us by the hair. He's saying, you're in the cave and all you see are the shadows. There's only shadows. God damn it. There's only shadows. Now prove to me there's not only shadows. And if you say, no, I don't want to believe there's only shadows. He's like, fucking, you got no argument. There's only shadows. Well, your argument that there's only shadows is defective. I know it is. I know. But what's the right thing? What's the right argument? He says, "I don't know." So here we are. Here we are until you come up with something better. And I think he's actually onto something too when he says that it's his story of how we come up with the idea of substance and self that that's I think maybe where his error is. Like he might be right about everything else, right? Look, you only know the table because of what the table can do to make an impression on your mind. It's you could stub your toe, it's taking up a length, breadth, and width, it's a lateral surface holding objects in a state of higher potential gravitational energy, it's reflecting light that's bouncing into your eye. That's all the access you have to the table. Take it away and make it an invisible table. Take away its impenetrability so you can walk right through it. Take away the fact that it holds objects up. There's no damn table there anymore. You have no right to talk about a table that isn't doing those things. The only thing you know about the table is what it's doing. He might be very, 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 very right about that. But he doesn't say that that means there isn't a table. And then he says, well, we have an illusion of a table because we tie a knot around all the things that it's doing. There's got to be something wrong with this argument, not because he doesn't like the conclusion. Notice that. It's not that he says I don't like the conclusion, so there must be something wrong with it. No, he's fine with accepting the conclusion. He's unflinching. If that is the truth, he's happy to say it. So he's not running away from this, but he is noticing that his argument that that's the case and that therefore there isn't a thing, that there's no self and that there's no substance. It's right, but it can't be the full story because the argument that is right has to rely on it not being right. Right? He knows there's a defect here. It's not because he doesn't like the conclusion. He's happy to say it's true if it's true. So he's just stuck. He's stuck saying, I don't know why there's more than shadows. I have no access to anything other than shadows. There can't be anything. I know why I imagine I have access to things other than shadows. I can explain it all away. It's just shadows. But I know that my argument that's just shadows is relying on something, which means that it can't just be shadows. I know there's something wrong with the argument, but I don't know what the answer is. So he's demanding that we give an answer to this, and he won't let us accept a cartoonish substitution for it. He won't let us. This is how bad the problem is. This is how bad it is. And you're not wriggling away from me. I'm going to hold you here and I'm going to face the shadows. You don't know that there's a wall that the shadows are on. You don't know that you're looking. It's just shadows. All you know of yourself is that you're seeing the shadow. That's all you know. So the shadow is real and nothing else is real. So let's wrap it up. He's impressive. He's impressive in a lot of ways. Okay. I feel a connection, determination, thought, blah, 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 blah. So he said, most philosophers seem inclined to think that personal identity arises from consciousness, and consciousness is nothing but a reflected thought or perception. The present philosophy, therefore, has so far a promising aspect. You could find consciousness again, right? You could find a self as long as it's defined as itself perception, right? He thinks we can find a way around this somehow, but he doesn't know how. Or a way through, let's say, a way through the pit, out up the other side, but he doesn't know how. The present philosophy, therefore, has a promising aspect. He said, I think we could make it somehow, but I can't make it. All my hopes vanish when I come to explain the principles that unite our successive perceptions in our thought and consciousness. I cannot discover any theory which gives me satisfaction on this head. He doesn't know how to get out. So he's saying, look, I dove into this pit and I don't know how to get out. I know there's a pit. I know I was out of it. I dove in, whatever. I suspect this isn't all there is, but I don't know why. I want to get out properly. In short, there are two principles which I cannot render consistent, nor is it in my power to renounce either of them. So two principles, I can't make them consistent, but I can't deny either of them. All our distinct perceptions are distinct existences, and that the mind never perceives any real connection among distinct existences. You hit the nail on the head. Your criticism, he's acknowledging that that's so. When you said, is this a good criticism of what David Hume is arguing? How can he tell that two things are the same to tie a knot around them in the first place? That Socratic thing that Socrates was arguing? He says, yeah, that argument works. There's something wrong with my argument because it can't answer that question Elena brought up. So good job, by the way. You're instinctively right on the right track. And he's saying exactly that. The mind never perceives any real connection among distinct existences. How can that be if that's how it creates the illusion of the sameness and tie a knot around it? And these are the same and these are different. How are we doing that if we've never, ever, ever had anything except a series of varying and different things? This was Socrates' argument for the ultimate truth. He said, you do. So if we were to reword Socrates' argument to address David Hume exactly, he would say, you pointed it out yourself. You do that. Even if you want to think that's an illusion, your capacity to create that illusion means that it can't all just be shadows. How did you decide these were the same and these were different? All your perceptions are different from each other in quality and the nature of everything's variant, everything's different, you said. So whence came this notion of sameness to you? You know nothing but difference all the time. That's what you keep saying. So how can you tie a knot around things that are similar enough? They're close enough to sameness. What sameness? Whence did you experience sameness to have that as an idea? Did our perceptions either inhere in something simple and individual, or did the mind perceive some real connection among them? There would be no difficulty in the case. For my part, I must plead the privilege of a skeptic. All right, so this is the answer to the question of how he's going to end this. I'm just going to say I don't know. I'm just going to say stay here until I have a reason to know. I even know that I'm not right, that this is the ultimate answer, but I'm going to stay here and not affirm things until I have an answer. And confess that this difficulty is too hard for my understanding. I pretend not, however, to pronounce it absolutely insuperable. Others, perhaps, or myself, upon more mature reflections, may discover some hypothesis that will reconcile those contradictions. There's a lot that's impressive about David Hume. Here's another one. He doesn't have to pretend like he's got the answers. Like Socrates' entire mantle that he wanted to put on his students when he drank the hemlock, his commitment to the divine mission to manifest this way of being his entire life was the commitment of not saying you know something when you don't know it, not pretending you have knowledge that yet other people are pretending to have. That's the true academic Socratic spirit. David Hume is embodying it. Now, Socrates is talking about Socrates may even have the answer to David Hume's problem here, by the way. So we'll put that aside right now. But David Hume doesn't see it. And as long as he doesn't see it, he says, I'm staying right here. The thing I know most is that all I know are the shadows. My ability to know that all I know are the shadows seems contradictory. How could I even possibly do that unless I know something else? But I don't know how I could. And I've even got a story about how it's an illusion that I could. And the vulgar perspective that we all know who we are as selves and we never change and the things must exist and be external and have substance, all of that. I can tell you a story about how we make that up because it's certainly not knowledge. It's certainly not something that I can trace how we came to know it. So I'm not going to say it's true. But my knowing that it's not true still relies on something other than just the shadows. So there's something wrong with my argument. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's too hard a problem for me to solve. Maybe someone in the future will solve it. Maybe tomorrow I'll find the answer. I don't know. But for now, I'm staying right here. I'm not afraid of the hell I'm in. I'm not afraid of the chaos. I'm not afraid of the consequences. I'm going to accept the consequences and say them until you give me a real answer, until I know how to get out. I'm not going to run away from it and pretend. That's worse. That's more deception. That's further from the truth. You might ask what Elena asked earlier. Why do you care? You're bringing something characterological to this to care about the truth, but we could talk about that another day. There are people who swallow. There are philosophical schools which swallow everything that David Hume is saying and provide different attempts to answer it, and some of them really rely upon his observations in order to get to the ultimate answer. And we can judge those later when we read them. So we finally made it through, Elena, the first essay. I got to tell you, we read through that quite quickly the first time we did it, and with the other group, and it wasn't recorded. We took 2 days with at
Four
least
to
9
five
hours.
hours. Yeah.
It was at
And
least 9 hours total, and we did it in like 1.5 hours in the other class. I am loving the fact that we did this. So it was actually 4 sessions. We did 2 on Monday and we did 2 on today. So on this Monday. So this is awesome, and I am really looking forward to this. To remind us of what we're doing, we just finished David Hume's essay here. It's the first of a collection of essays from people arguing in different perspectives and from different camps, trying to wrestle with the problem that we introduced originally, which is called the mind-body problem. And the mind-body problem is this idea of if mind is one kind of thing and our concept of bodies is another kind of thing, how is it that the mind can will and then move the body? Or how is it that you can prick the body and then create a mental sensation of pain? How can these two affect each other? Because our idea of them is of things that are qualitatively just completely different. So that was a nice introduction, and I'm glad we did it as deeply as we did with David Hume. if anything, the problem is, and the consequences of the problem are a lot more serious and real and stark for us now for having gone through David Hume. And we've gotten a lot of other benefits by reading this as well. He's an interesting character. So we're gonna go into just a discussion time now about what we've been doing here today, but we have other essays that we will be looking at. So on Wednesday, we will meet for at least one session, and we'll do 2 sessions on Mondays. This is our new calendar, so I'll repeat it one more time to anybody who's coming in. We did determinism and free will. We're starting the ethics section on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. We did the whole philosophy of theology introduction, all of the existence of God arguments. Now, Elena and I are redoing the mind body stuff because she wasn't here for it and because I didn't record it. So there are, I think it's a much shorter section than the God one. Let's take a quick look here, if you don't mind, just so that we can tell ourselves where we're going in the future here. So we did the intro to the whole thing. We just finally finished. Oh yeah, these are some good essays. This is going to be really, really good. Okay. Oh, we're going to have fun. I'm glad we're doing this. Okay. So let me just give me 1 second to look this up, to talk to us about what we just did. Is we took a deep dive into that. All right. So Personal Identity by David Hume. Wednesday, we'll do Thomas Reid of the nature and origin of our notion of personal identity. Then we do C.D. Broad's The Traditional Problem of Body and Mind. Then we look at John Tyndall's The Limitations of Scientific Materialism in addressing this concept, this question. Very similar to what we saw in the determinism versus free will stuff, all very relevant. Then we look at T.H. Huxley's The Automaton Theory, Viscount Samuel A.J. Ayer and Gilbert Kyle, The Physical Basis of Mind, a Philosopher's Symposium. I remember that. Then we look at J.J.C. Smart's Sensations and Brain Processes, Holmes's 10 Reasons for Believing in Immortality. It's a very good essay. And then we end with Clarence Darrow, The Myth of Immortality. Okay. So we're going to mind, body, and death, personal identity. We're just getting an intro to the intro taste of the types of questions in this. And when we're done with this, we're going to rearrange the calendar a little bit, and we're going to do the full philosophy of mind course, the full 101 philosophy of mind thing. So I'm going to end the recording, and Elena and I are going to have an after conversation about all of this, which, by the way, I should record that stuff. It's way better than the recorded stuff, but y'all get just the recorded stuff for now. In any case, we're going to go do that. And then on Mondays and Wednesdays, we're going to continue doing this course at least twice as long on Mondays. And when it's done, then we're going to start with Savad and Elena doing the full philosophy of mind course, where we're going to get to dive into all these things a lot deeper and look at a whole bunch of other things that apply, including AI and reductionism and behavioralism and functionalism and all sorts of really cool methods for trying to understand the mind. So I'm going to end the stream there. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you later.